how's it going? My name is Jay and welcome to the channel. Today we're back in Sannikovland in planetzoo and we're going to be continuing our build of this really large tropical zoo, and today we're going to be introducing 2 new species. Before we continue any further, if you like this content, if you like the series so far, please do hit the subscribe button and of course like the video if you do enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. For those of you returning to the series from the last episode, I know what you're going to say, and don't worry, the llamas are safe. They're all in the trade center, no harm has come to our llamas. All 6 of them are safely tucked away in our trade center. For those of you who are new to this series, quick explanation. I built a llama habitat in the previous episode, and as of this episode, it's gone. And a quick explanation as to why is, I just didn't like it. Looking back on the previous episode and looking at the build afterwards, I just couldn't help but think, okay, I'm not satisfied with this, can't quite figure out why, so let's, scrap the whole thing. We'll find another way to put it down later, maybe change up the design, or maybe use the pre-existing design, because I did save the habitat as a blueprint in case I want to reuse it. But yeah, I scrapped the whole llama habitat, which renders most of the last episode kind of pointless, but I thought, you know what, let's just go for it, which is why the title of this episode is called A Tremendous Undertaking. Not only did I scrap the llama habitat, I actually went ahead and changed a lot about the entrance area to the zoo. And that was because, well, there were a lot of little things that I wanted to do and I wanted to change, and I thought to myself, you know what, let's just do this. I'll put some music on, listen to a couple podcasts, just blast my way through this and just work at it until I'm happy. And I gotta say, I am happy. I'm so happy with all the changes I've made. Instead of the llama habitat, which is there today, we're going to be introducing our new species, which we'll talk about in a bit. And as well as the entrance area being completely, well, not completely redone. Like a lot of the path work and the entrance shops and the capuchin habitat is all still in place, but a lot of stuff is changed. So now we have a giant lake that kind of is situated around the entrance area. It's kind of made up of 3 lake basins, so one is a bit more of a pond and it's situated outside the car park, but it's linked to one really big basin, which is linked to another really big basin, which is right next to where the exit and entrance are, so you'll see that here. And what I think is great about this lake is it really frames the entrance really well. Well, before the lake was there, whenever you entered the zoo, everything just looked so bland and kind of blank. Like, even if it's not finished right now, the lake gives it this air of being a bit more complete, and I think that really helps while building the zoo. It kind of helps me picture what it's going to look like when it's done. And I think having a lake at the entrance just opens up so many possibilities. We could do things like a lakeside boardwalk, a cafe on stilts, that sort of stuff that we can really take advantage of in the coming episodes. And I think that's such a good thing, really. Aside from that, I've added a few other things near the entrance, one of them being this kind of centerpiece where you enter the park and those little triangles that we use for the entrance buildings, those ones made out of bamboo. What I did was I took some of them, I flipped them around so they pointed upwards, and from there I sunk them down a little bit and duplicated them so they looked a little bit like a mountain range, like a very stylized mountain range. And then I plopped down those animal signs, the ones that are kind of just the silhouettes of the animals, and had them kind of line up, and I did that for both sides, and I think it looks really nice because obviously the zoo is situated in the middle of all these really kind of imposing, what I assume to be limestone hills or mountains, and of course being a zoo it's full of animals, obviously. So I thought this really stylized centerpiece looks like it could be kind of harkening back to that idea of the zoo being surrounded by all these mountains. So it looks like, a very stylized mountain range with animals, you know what I'm getting at, essentially. And I think it turned out really good, so I'm very happy with it. But yeah, moving on from the entrance and all that's changed there, moving closer towards where the llama habitat used to be, and it's gone now obviously, the staff building we built in the last episode is still there. And just next to it, where the llama habitat was, I included the first toilet because I realized I haven't included a toilet anywhere yet, and obviously guests need toilets, That's kind of, yeah, they need toilets. Not much else to say about that, so I introduced one. try to give it a very modern look. Just a very nice looking modern restroom, and I think it ends up looking pretty nice. It is functional, of course, so if we ever open the zoo to guests, they can use it. And moving further on, we can start talking about today's habitat. And boy, is it a fun one. I really enjoyed building this habitat. It was a lot of fun. We really played around with elevation a lot. You may have noticed one of the things that I kept from the last episode was the set of pathways that kind of zigzag upwards at a very low incline. I was a big fan of that because I wanted that to be kind of the entrance to the South America section. It kind of really alludes to Central and South American pyramids. So if you've seen pictures of them or if you've seen them in real life, they're multi-leveled pyramids which have these kind of really interesting staircases. So this is very loosely kind of alluding to that image of these multiple tiers with very gentle stairs heading upwards. So there's a kind of, like I said, a very loose visual depiction of that. So I kept that and I built this habitat around it. And I included a couple things, including an underwater viewing section, and that'll become quite apparent as to why I did that later on in the video. And I really wanted to play with elevation, so we have multiple different elevations for these animals as well. The main area of the habitat itself is sunken down to below ground level so that you're looking kind of down into the habitat, but as you go towards the back it rises a little bit more and rises more until there are entire portions where ground level for the animals is actually above the ground level for the humans. And I think it all comes together to form a very visually interesting habitat, which I think would provide a lot of stimulation for the animals and just feel a little bit more like their natural habitat. And later on, there's another reason I did that, and that's to ensure that all the sight lines for guests are going to be at points where you cannot see any of the staff buildings. And that was a bit tricky, but if you've seen the cinematics later at the end of the video, I do feel like I succeeded with that. Because from all the main viewing points, you can't see any staff buildings. It's all just the habitat itself, and did that via a mix of foliage and elevation change. So I do hope that turned out the way I thought it did. I think it did. And so yeah, feel free to let me know what you think of that whole approach. And as far as the inhabitants of this habitat go, today we've got two species, namely the Baird tapir and the giant anteater. Two very cool animals with very snuffly noses, and they're both lovely, and I love both these animals so much. And guess what time it is, guys? It is time for the species profiles of the day. So today we've obviously got two sets of species profiles because we've got two species we're going to be introducing into this habitat. And let's start off right now with the Baird tapir. So the scientific name for this little guy is the Tapirus bairdi, if I'm saying that right. These guys are unfortunately endangered as far as the IUCN is concerned. They grow up to about 400 kilograms from pretty hefty animals, nearly half a ton. And they grow to about 2.5 meters long, so they're pretty long as well. They live in rainforest environments, deciduous forest, mangroves, kind of very humid, wet environments with a lot of tree cover. And they grow up to about 30 years old, so again, pretty long-lived animals as well. As far as their diet is concerned, these guys do enjoy their fruits, leaves, and seeds. Seeds being a really important one, because these guys play a huge role in forests in terms of dispersing seeds from trees. So as they go around chomping on things and pooping out their various seeds and stuff, they disperse these plants all over the forest and allow them to grow in different places and essentially grow the forest as a whole, which is a very cool thing. Let's move on to some really interesting facts about the tapirs, and this is some stuff I really wanted to talk about. First off, the Baird tapir is one of 4 or possibly 5 tapir species, and out of all of these, only one tapir species does not exist in South/Central America, and that's the Malayan tapir, which exists in Southeast Asia, which is where I'm from and where I'm currently based. And I've had the pleasure of actually being able to see a Malayan tapir up close and personal. The company I'm interning with, they do wildlife documentaries, and on one of their shoots I managed to go along with them, and they went to visit this kind of animal rehabilitation center, and I got to see a fully grown Malayan tapir literally inches away from me, and it was beautiful. Such a huge animal, and it's gorgeous and very, very cool experience. I personally think tapirs are super interesting animals. Unfortunately, the one I did see was an injured one. It was rescued because it got caught in a snare trap, but it is recovering pretty well, which is nice to know. Anyways, back to the species of tapir. This is a very interesting topic because, first off, why are there 3 or 4 tapir species in South and Central America, and then there's just a random tapir species all the way in Southeast Asia? How did that happen? That's a very interesting topic, and there's a lot of information on the internet about it, so I do recommend you look it up for a more in-depth explanation. But the gist of it is that tapir species used to be widespread all across continental Asia and all across the Americas, essentially. And over time, all the species across the middling continents kind of slowly went extinct due to various reasons, getting outcompeted by other species, etc., etc. And eventually, that left us with this really unique kind of situation where we have one species completely separate from the other 4 species or so, which is absolutely cool. I think that's just so interesting. And like I said, there's so much information out there. Please do check it out for a more in-depth explanation. Obviously, I'm just kind of going over it pretty fast just to kind of get through the topics. Anyways, when I say 4 or 5 tapir species, that's actually another interesting thing, is that recently there has been some kind of a debate around whether or not there's a potential 5th species that might be a thing, but people aren't really sure if they should be a thing. And let me just quickly double check that. Yep, there's one called the little black tapir, or the Kabomani tapir, and it's partially recognized essentially. They're not sure if it is a different species. It could be the same as the South American tapir, so it could be interesting to see how that evolves. The more information we get about the species, the more DNA we have to kind of do some taxonomic analysis, stuff like that. So we'll probably find out more in the future whether or not it is a different species. One of the really cool things that has kind of come about in recent years is the kind of prevalence of molecular phylogenetics, so the use of DNA and epigenetics and stuff like that to kind of place animals and people in different genetic brackets to kind of help understand them a little bit more, which I think is really, really interesting stuff. So back to the interesting facts about our tapir. These guys are pretty big as well. They are the largest land mammal native to South America. They're, like I said before, nearly half a ton. They're very large animals. In fact, the only natural predators would be possibly some of the larger crocodilians, and of course the occasional jaguar. But even then, these guys can often come out on top, because we've seen a lot of adult tapirs in the wild where they have scars of claw and teeth marks, but they're all healed over, which means these guys are able to get away and kind of escape. And another cool thing about them is they spend a majority of their time in the water, which kind of explains why I've done the underwater viewing in this habitat. A lot of a tapir's day is spent just kind of soaking and chilling in the water without a care in the world. But if they did have a care in the world, they would also go to water. And what I mean by that is that that's a way they actually evade a lot of predators. And that might sound counterintuitive considering I just told you the 2 predators they have both love water. But I'm not quite sure how this works, but apparently they do run away from predators into water to feel safe. So maybe this is more in reference to... So I imagine that's more kind of in relation to land predators, but again, I'm not too sure about that whole fact, so take that one with a grain of salt. It might just be another sort of behavior that was misidentified as escaping from a predator. But the thing is, they do in fact spend a lot of their time in the water, which I think is really cool. Like, that just sounds like a really chill life in the rainforest, hanging out in rivers and lakes. And the next fact we have is that their offspring are the cutest. I mean, that's not the fact. I mean, that is a fact. They are the cutest for sure. But the fact that I was going to talk about is the fact that the offspring of all tapir species, including the Malayan tapir, which is actually colored quite differently from these guys, have a really lovely spotted and striped kind of fur pattern. And this really helps them camouflage because it kind of matches the look of the forest floor when you have like light shining through the trees. So you have this dappled kind of appearance in the forest floor where light creates patches, and it really helps the Baird tapir babies camouflage and hide away from predators. Because when you're a little baby tapir, you don't have the kind of the heft and the durability of an adult, of course. So you want to play things a little bit more carefully. Anyways, that's it for our tapirs. I hope you've enjoyed that species profile, but we are not done yet. Now it is time for species profile number 2 of the day, and for me, one of my favorite animals in the game right now. So let's talk about the giant anteater. Its scientific name is Myrmecophaga tridactyla. So that name translates directly into anteater, basically. Myrmeco kind of refers to ants and insects. Phaga or phage means to eat, and tridactyla means 3 fingers, although that's not accurate, but apparently they have 5 fingers, so yeah, don't know why that's the thing. Their IUCN status is vulnerable, which is not the best. They are threatened a little bit by deforestation, stuff like that, which is never good. Going on to their size, they get up to about 50 kilograms, so not particularly large, but quite long, so they get up to about 2.2 meters, and a lot of that is made up by their ridiculously long snout and their really long bushy tail. You might notice they've got quite a tail, which is one of their more impressive features aside from their really vivid black and white coloration, as well as that, obviously, that super long proboscis. As far as their habitat goes, they do wander between rainforests, the deciduous forest, and grassland environments, so they do thrive in denser foliage environments as well as kind of open plains. Essentially anywhere they can find a good source of food, they can thrive. They live up to about 15 years in the wild. They do eat, as their name might suggest, ants and a variety of other animals, insects I might add. Primarily small insects that form large colonies, so things like termites are a great source of food for these guys. Ants, of course, some beetle species they enjoy, but generally speaking, almost entirely insect, because, as you might know, they don't have any teeth actually. So what they do with their tongue is they kind of slurp up an ant or an insect, and as it enters the body, it kind of scrapes across the top of its mouth and across its palate, I believe it's called, and that will kind of grind up the insect of its choice. So let's get into some really interesting facts about these animals. One of the coolest things about anteaters is that they don't produce their own stomach acid, which is absolutely bonkers. You know why? It's because they use the acid from the ants that they eat. Ants produce formic acid. And if you're eating thousands and thousands of ants, you're going to accumulate your own, essentially, stockpile of formic acid that you can use to digest your prey. Can you imagine? Like, that's so metal, using your own prey's digestive acid to digest them. That's insane. That's actually insane. I'm like so cool. Their tongue, which they use to slurp up all those ants, can be up to 60 centimeters long, which is also crazy. This animal is just crazy all around. It's so cool. But this super long tongue can also flick out and back in about 150 times per minute. That is insane. That's that's more than twice a second to get ants. So each time it goes out, imagine getting like a ball of ants coming and just pulling back in so fast. That is just really, really cool, I think. And they constantly swallow, so they don't have to pause. They can just keep flicking their tongue in and out, getting ants, bringing it back in, and they don't need to like pause to swallow it. It's just automatically getting eaten. So I think that's really interesting. And moving on from their really unusual bodies and mouths and stuff, and going on to something to do with their lineage, think for a second, what do you think anteaters are most closely related to? If you said things like armadillos or other long-snouted things like pangolins or even tapirs, you're actually not in the right ballpark, which that's what I thought at first when I was kind of like back before I learned about anteaters back in the day. I thought, yeah, these guys look like, armadillos, pangolins, that sort of thing. But no, they're not actually in that family. They are close to an extent, but not there at all. These guys actually belong to Pilosa, which comprises of all anteaters, and get this, sloths. Yeah, these guys, the anteaters, are most closely related to sloths, which is so interesting. So whatever their baseline species was for Pilosa, it diverged into sloths and anteaters when they were already well established in South America, and so both those species ended up growing into what they are today, which I find super interesting. So if you're interested in genealogy and kind of stuff like how species diverge and stuff like that, it's just very interesting stuff to read about. So I would suggest definitely looking up the order Pilosa, which is what these guys are from. It's just super interesting. They originated maybe about 55 or so million years ago, potentially. This group also included like the extinct giant ground sloths, which are really interesting animals as well. Those are huge ground sloths, as you might know. There's like a skeleton of it in the London Natural History Museum, which I see all the time and I love it. But yeah, that kind of does it for our species of today. I do really hope you've enjoyed the species profile, and I hope you've learned something about these amazing animals, because they're really cool, and I love animals like this, and I love learning about animals like this, and I love sharing this information with you guys, especially when it comes to the weird animals. My whole thing in life is just weird animals. That is my, I just really love weird animals, basically, anything that's a little bit out of the ordinary. Which in fact, actually, you guys, if you're interested in that sort of stuff too, please do follow me on Twitter. Links down in the description. I don't actually tweet very much, but I just basically use it to compile all the cool animal videos I can find, and I just retweet them. That's basically all I do, and occasionally I will tweet about whenever I have a new video and stuff, so yeah, go ahead and follow me on Twitter if you like. But other than that, that is all for the species for today. And now we can just go back to talking a little bit more about today's habitat. Now that you've seen on screen, it's probably closer to being finished now. And this habitat was, like I said, so much fun to build. I really love playing with different heights, different elevations, and as well as I'm really loving using rocks to kind of transition between height levels, and I'm doing that here as well as using a lot of rocks for barrier sections. And oh my god, you've heard me say it before, but these new mossy rocks, the dynamic mossy rocks especially, are the best. They are so cool and so much fun to use because of that whole effect where the moss only appears on the sky facing orientation of whatever rock you're using, so you can rotate it however much you want, and only the side facing the sky will be covered in moss, which is just great. That is such a cool little mechanic they've implemented into the game, and I can see them using that for other things in the future. I imagine in the future they'll have a snow covered rock which is dynamic as well, so that could be pretty cool. But yeah, I use these rocks everywhere, and of course I go absolutely nuts with the foliage again. I want to remind myself that at the end of the day we are in a tropical rainforest. That's where we're building. I should use tropical rainforest foliage, so I'm using so much of it. And I'm trying to get over my fear of using really big trees. I'm a bit nervous about them. You may have noticed I haven't used any of the really big trees like the kapok tree. And I've only used the one wimber tree in this episode, and obviously I've used the Brazil nuts. But I am a little bit nervous about using the really big trees because they stand out so much, and it can be very hard to build up to them in a natural way when it comes to foliage. But I think going along, I'm going to try and start doing more of that, use a few more of the bigger trees. One thing I found that really helps actually with the big trees is what I've done today with the Brazil nut trees. I'm not sure if I included the footage, but what I did is you essentially clutter them up. I'm not just using them as their base trees, I'm cluttering them up with vines, with things that kind of hang off them, like the Spanish hanging moss. I'm using some of the strangler fig root pieces to kind of make their bottoms a little bit more hefty, give them more root space. It's just it's really important to clutter up your foliage, I think, when it comes to tropical rainforest. In fact, I added some bird's nest ferns up high in the trees as well, use some of the bromeliads in different spots, because it is really, really important. If you've been to a tropical rainforest of any sort, you will notice that there's clutter everywhere. You look on the ground, there's not just bushes, but there's fallen twigs, fallen logs, rocks everywhere, leaves everywhere. There's so much just natural litter everywhere, leaf litter, soil just poking up at weird spots, and roots just growing everywhere. I actually quite like the look of a tropical rainforest being so cluttered. It's something I've grown to kind of appreciate more and more, because like I said in a couple other videos, I live in a tropical country, so I'm quite exposed to that kind of foliage. In fact, I grew up around it. I used to go hiking in like these nearby hills, which are really dense tropical rainforest, and I never appreciated how truly remarkable the foliage was until I grew up a little bit more. And I try to really carry that through to my builds. I really want to focus on making this foliage feel tropical, because there is this really important feeling I want to carry across in the zoo of this dense, lush, humid rainforest that when you get into any of it, you just feel like you're getting lost and you entered another world. I want to really carry that feeling across, if that makes any sense at all. But yeah, I think as I go along, doing foliage like I am here and slowly building more and more into it, I think will look so cool. Obviously there will be sections where I'm going to limit it a bit more, like I'm probably going to do an African savanna section at some point, and I will likely not make that very foliage heavy. Same goes for if I'm making anything like if I'm making an indoor tundra habitat or something like that. Obviously I will limit my foliage use. But for the park as a whole, I do want to really get into it with the foliage. Back to the habitat itself that we did today for these guys. Actually, in the start, I actually considered making 2 separate habitats, because obviously we have 2 separate species. But I thought it looked nice having just these 2 male and female tapirs hanging out, and then having this just one male anteater just kind of waddling about and doing its own thing. I made a shelter. It's a kind of a modern looking shelter using the plaster pieces, and also covered some of it with mulch so that we can have kind of a green roof effect, so that plants can go all over it and it can kind of hide away the shelter a little bit. On the inside of the shelter is actually where the staff can access these animals, and I put in a little metal like wall so that the staff do have an area where they can separate themselves from the animals and also separate the animals out. I didn't put too much effort into that right now, but when it comes to more dangerous animals down the line, I will definitely put in a lot more thought and effort into kind of separating the staff out and allowing for separation of animals and kind of adhering to that realism a little bit more. But for these guys, I thought it was okay. I mean, they're not the most dangerous animals. Apparently there is a case of a giant anteater killing someone, a zookeeper, and I just gotta wonder how that happened. These animals are not like the biggest things in the world. They do have sharp claws though, so I assume that's what happened, but like, yeah, that's actually a thing that happened. I think it happened in Argentina. I'm not 100% sure, but it's on the anteater Wikipedia page, so that's an interesting fun fact for you guys. Tapirs are also not super aggressive. They can be if they're like, if they see you as a threat, but I imagine these tapirs would probably be used to the zookeepers, and the zookeepers would be pretty chill with the tapirs too, so I imagine it would be pretty okay. But yeah, as we go along, I will try and do a bit more interesting backstage stuff as well, just to kind of make it feel a bit more realistic. Like with this one, I think it does carry across the realism pretty decently, but I will put more attention to it when it comes to more dangerous animals, of course. Which actually might be in our next episode, so look out for that. That will be pretty cool. Our next episode will carry on with South America, and you guys can already probably guess what I'm talking about. And of course, as we go along, we're going to finish up South America and move on to different continents and carry on with our build there. But that's it for today's episode. I really hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from the species profile. I hope you've enjoyed watching the build. I might again experiment with a few different styles of video. In the next one, maybe I'll try and do a live portion as well, where I'll show you around the park. But I won't promise anything right now, because I'm not sure if that'll carry across the best with my style of presentation. So we'll see if that ends up being a thing. But yeah, thank you so much again for watching. If you liked the video, please do leave me a like. We're at about 250 subscribers now, so that's great. So if you enjoy this content, please do subscribe as well. I make planetzoo content pretty regularly, and as well as Jurassic World Evolution content once in a while. So of course do subscribe if you enjoy that, and leave a comment down below and tell me what your favourite part of this build was. What do you think of the species profile, what do you think of these animals, and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, that's about it. So as always, I'll see you guys in the next one, and thanks for watching. Bye!